terrifying spirit has descended upon the world. Anyone who falls asleep is killed in their dreams. A massive whale appeared 10,000 meters above the ground, and with just a slow wave of its fin, a strange triangular symbol emerged in the pupils of humans. Tens of thousands of people under its influence begin moving uncontrollably toward a mysterious zone. The story begins at a lively house party in a neighborhood where Dave and his friends are celebrating together. But just as everyone is having fun, Mateo gets into an argument with Connor over his boyfriend. During the shoving, Connor accidentally bumps into their drunk friend Tony, who suddenly collapses to the floor. Gus thinks Tony is just too drunk and shouts at him to get up. But when he approaches, he realizes Tony is no longer breathing.
Tony?
Yo, he good?
He's not breathing.
Hearing Gus's panic, Dave rushes over to perform CPR, while Mateo quickly dials for an ambulance, but no one answered the call. Panic spreads through the group, and fearing trouble, most of the friends quietly slip away. Dave went back into the house hoping to ask his friends to drive Tony to the hospital, but to his horror, he found that the two friends had also mysteriously died.
Hey! Randy!
Seeing this, Dave suspects some kind of toxic gas might be spreading inside the house. He covers his mouth and nose, rushing out to warn the others, but outside, he finds only Mateo left. Everyone else has already fled. Though unsure of what's really happening, Dave refuses to abandon his poisoned friends. With Mateo's help, he loads the poisoned friends into a car and races to the hospital. When they arrive, the hospital is already overcrowded. Hallways and waiting rooms are filled with patients. They flag down a busy doctor named Linda. When Linda hears there are 3 more patients, she rushes outside with them. But after examining them, she tells Dave and Mateo that their friends are already dead. From Linda, they learn that something strange has just happened across the city. Many residents have suddenly died without warning. Dave and Mateo are stunned by the news. Linda asks them to wait in the lobby for the police to arrive. With no other option, the two sit down in the waiting area. But what they don't know is that the same phenomenon is happening all around the world. There are no police, no help coming. Realizing the police and government are unreachable, the sharp-minded hospital director Gordon grabs his briefcase and tries to sneak away. But Linda spots him just as he's sneaking out. Gordon's warning makes Linda suspicious, but as a doctor, she can't simply abandon her patients. She turns to her friend Brittany for support. Although Gordon's theory seemed reasonable, Brittany was also someone with a strong sense of responsibility. She said she wouldn't leave, but after working through the night, she needed to rest for a while. Hearing this, Linda finally feels a bit more at ease. But she doesn't know that Brittany will never wake up again. Meanwhile, Dave and Mateo are still anxiously waiting for the police. Exhausted from the sleepless night, Dave leans back on the couch to rest, only to catch a glimpse of something horrifying. An old man nearby starts foaming at the mouth, and Dave initially thinks he's having a seizure. He approaches to alert the man's daughter, only to find she's already dead. Dave shouts for help, and Linda rushes over. She tries to begin emergency treatment, but realizes she's alone and can't do much. She runs to the break room to wake Brittany, but finds her lying lifeless on the couch. Seeing this, Linda immediately realizes something is very wrong. Could this really be, as Gordon said, a terrorist attack? But what kind of gas could kill so many people instantly? Linda tells Dave to drive her to the police station. If this is an attack, the police would surely have been alerted. But as their car drives through the streets, something feels terribly off. The once busy roads are empty. Not a single car or pedestrian in sight. Linda fires a gun into the air, but the silence remains. They each enter nearby apartments, only to find that everyone inside has mysteriously died. Linda suspects a virus may be spreading, one that strikes as soon as people fall asleep. Hearing Linda's analysis, Dave recalled what he had seen in the lobby. Those 2 family members also seemed to have died in their sleep. Though still unsure of the cause, Linda insists they must warn the entire country. People working night shifts need to stay awake. But how could they reach everyone? Mateo suggests using the radio. It's the fastest way to broadcast a message. Hearing Linda's warning, Dave suddenly thought of his ex-girlfriend, Katie. She had the night shift yesterday, and by now, she should have just gotten off work. Dave quickly calls Katie, desperate to warn her not to fall asleep. But Katie assumes he's just trying to get back together and hangs up before he can explain. Frustrated by her stubbornness, Dave tells Linda and Mateo to head to the radio station without him. He's going to find Katie himself. Luckily, she lives nearby, and Dave races off toward her apartment. At that moment, Katie had already taken sleeping pills and was getting ready for bed. When she saw Dave at her door, she thought he was there begging to get back together. Meanwhile, Linda and Mateo had arrived at the radio station. It wasn't until Katie heard the emergency broadcast that she realized Dave hadn't been lying, but she had already taken her sleeping pills. Luckily, it hadn't been long. After a struggle, she managed to throw it up in time. Right after that, Katie and Dave rushed to the hospital. But as they waited in the lobby until evening, not a single survivor showed up. It became clear everyone else must have died in their sleep. Just then, a faint voice called out from one of the patient rooms. Linda turned and saw an elderly woman. Her name was Ruth, and because she suffered from a terminal illness and couldn't sleep due to the pain, she had survived by chance. To find out why people were dying in their sleep, Linda decided to examine one of the bodies. With Dave's help, they carried one of the dead into the operating room. But just as Linda was preparing for a cranial autopsy, something strange happened. The body's temperature wasn't dropping. It was actually rising, and strange white smoke began rising from it like a computer chip burning out. Seeing the smoke, Linda quickly sawed open the skull. To her shock, she found a strange triangular symbol burned into the man's brain. Looking at the symbol, Dave suddenly remembered something from a few days ago. He had a nightmare while asleep, a dream, where he saw a whale flying through the sky. On the ground, a group of strange people appeared to be performing a ritual. Under the influence of that ritual, Dave had carved a triangle into his own chest with a knife. And that triangle looked exactly the same as the one on the dead man's brain. And this wasn't the first time Dave had such a dream. When he was a child, he had also dreamed of the whale and those strange people. All of this made Dave uneasy, and he began to wonder, could this disaster be connected to that triangle? As he struggled with that thought, Linda wheeled Ruth into the MRI chamber. It turned out Ruth had volunteered to let Linda study her. She didn't have long to live anyway, and if she could help find the cause, maybe others could be saved. Linda hesitated, but there was no better option. As Ruth drifted into sleep, the machine began scanning. Almost immediately, Linda noticed abnormalities. Ruth's brain showed intense activity after falling asleep. About 30 seconds later, Ruth died in her sleep. Linda concluded that Ruth must have had an extremely terrifying nightmare, one so intense it caused her to die from fear. This, she realized, was why people were dying in their sleep. So this wasn't a terrorist attack, and it wasn't a virus, because no terrorist could create something this horrific. It was more like a mysterious energy causing some kind of global anomaly.
I don't know, but it must have been a pretty bad one.
I'm getting real sick of your
Hearing Linda's theory, Mateo recalled an old legend. In the Bible, there's a record of the third demon under Lucifer, who invades people's dreams and kills them through nightmares. This demon is known as the octopus devil, but Linda was a firm atheist. She'd rather believe it was a magnetic anomaly than any kind of demon. Still, if it wasn't a demon, then who could possibly have the power to kill all of humanity in their sleep? At that moment, Dave remembered something. He had seen in Ruth's records that it took her 3 minutes after falling asleep to start dreaming.
3 minutes? Okay. Let me sleep for 2.5 minutes, and then wake me up.
Dave, what are you saying?
Or she died in a dream.
Hearing his idea, Linda was skeptical. Everyone's sleep patterns are different. What if Dave started dreaming the moment he fell asleep? Seeing that Linda wasn't convinced, Dave lifted his shirt and showed her the triangle carved into his chest. He told her about the dream he had and said he believed this incident had to be connected. After hearing Dave out, Linda agreed it was worth a try. To prevent Dave from falling asleep permanently, Linda came up with a plan. She told Dave to silently repeat in his mind, "I must wake up," and to ensure he could come back, Linda would also use physical means to forcibly wake him when the countdown ended. With everything ready, Dave lay down on the hospital bed. Since he hadn't slept for over 40 hours, he quickly slipped into a deep sleep. When Dave opened his eyes again, he found himself standing in the middle of a vast plain. It was the exact same place he had seen in his dreams. But just as he tried to look around, he realized his ankle was shackled. No matter how hard he struggled, he couldn't break free from the chain. Days seemed to pass in a blur, and Dave, trapped in place, grew weak with hunger and thirst. He wanted to reach the nearby pond for water, but the chain kept him from moving. Just as Dave was wondering what to do, a car slowly approached from the distance. A woman stepped out, and when Dave turned to look, he was stunned. It was his mother, who had passed away years ago. She held a glass of water and walked toward him, urging him to drink. It was the only way to be freed. But when Dave looked down, he saw that same eerie triangle floating on the surface of the water. He refused to drink it, yet his hand moved on its own, slowly lifting the glass to his lips. As Dave began to lose control, a figure suddenly appeared in the grass not far away. He wore a strange ceremonial robe and silently watched them. Dave recognized him. This was one of the strange people he had seen in his dreams. Suddenly, a loud cry echoed from the sky. Dave looked up to see the enormous whale appear once again. Before he could make sense of what was happening, the strange man walked toward him. He raised both hands and made a separating gesture. Instantly, Dave's mother was pushed away by an unseen force. As she vanished, the force controlling Dave also disappeared. When he looked back, He was horrified to see that his mother had transformed into a tentacled creature. He remembered what Matteo had said about the legend. Could it really be a demon at work? As Dave stood there, stunned, the man approached him. He told Dave that the demon killing people in their dreams was called Nightmare, the third demon under Lucifer, and he belonged to an organization that fights against the Nightmare, searching across the world for people with strong mental power to resist it. He told Dave to go to Alistair Island, a protected zone where the Nightmare couldn't reach. Before Dave could reply, the man gave him a push, and in the next instant, Dave woke up in the hospital. Linda told him he had been asleep for nearly an hour. If he hadn't woken soon, she was going to forcefully wake him. Dave hurriedly told everyone what he had seen in the dream. If they wanted to survive, they had to get to that island Safet mentioned. But Linda wasn't convinced. It didn't sound realistic. From what she knew, Alistair Island was in Norway, thousands of kilometers away. Even with a plane, it would take at least 17 hours to reach. And they had all been awake for over 40 hours. No one could hold on that long. Worse yet, none of them were pilots. As everyone began to lose hope, Matteo spoke up. He said he could fly a small plane, and the airport nearby had one. He said, "We're going to die anyway. Why not take a chance before it's too late? Maybe they'd make it." The others agreed. It was better than waiting around to die. Dave split them into two teams. Linda and Katie were tasked with gathering stimulants just in case. Matteo and Dave went to collect food, but just as they were about to head out, Dave noticed Katie starting to nod off. He quickly grabbed a syringe of adrenaline and gave her a shot. Snapping awake, Katie forced herself to stay alert. They soon drove to the airport, and just like everywhere else, there wasn't a single survivor. Matteo found a small passenger plane, and just as they were about to take off, a voice came through the radio. There was still one air traffic controller left in the tower. Matteo invited him to join them, but the controller refused. He wanted to stay in case any other planes tried to land. Respecting his decision, Matteo said no more. Under the controller's guidance, the plane successfully took off. But soon after leaving the ground, exhaustion began catching up to them. The first to falter was Katie. After working an overnight shift and now going 2 days without sleep, she finally passed out in her seat. Noticing something was wrong, Dave shook her frantically, but no matter how hard he tried, Katie wouldn't wake up. Linda pulled out another syringe of adrenaline, but Katie had already received a dose 3 hours earlier. This one had no effect. Watching Katie drift off to sleep, Dave himself was on the verge of collapse. In a daze, he saw Katie appear inside the cabin, but before he could feel relief, she suddenly transformed into a monster. The terrifying sight jolted Dave awake in an instant. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Matteo was also barely hanging on. To stay awake, he bit down on his own arm, but even as the skin broke and bled, the overwhelming fatigue refused to fade. Just as he was about to lose consciousness, Linda gave him a shot of adrenaline. The moment it entered his bloodstream, Matteo snapped back to full alertness. At that very moment, Matteo saw an island appear below them. It was Alistra Island, the place they had been searching for. He excitedly relayed the news to Dave and Linda in the back. Hearing that they had finally reached their destination, Dave let out a long sigh of relief. But the joy didn't last long. Matteo suddenly realized the island had no runway. Without a runway, landing the plane would be impossible. Seeing the calm sea below, Matteo came up with a plan. He told Dave and Linda to fasten their seatbelts. He was going to attempt a water landing. Before Dave could say anything, Matteo began guiding the plane down. The aircraft plunged straight toward the ocean. Thankfully, Matteo's piloting skills held up, and he managed to land the plane safely on the water. They hurriedly swam toward the shore. After nearly half a day of effort, they finally made it onto the island. But the surroundings were barren. No signs of life or human activity. Dave recalled the scene from his dream. There was a church at the center of the island. They would need to walk there on foot. After more than 60 hours without sleep, they were all at their limit. But with salvation so close, they refused to give up. Stumbling and exhausted, they pressed deeper into the island. In a daze, Dave saw Safed ahead and believed it was a sign. He led Matteo and Linda across the plains, but before long their strength gave out. The air began to distort and their minds filled with hallucinations. Eventually, all three collapsed in the grass, their eyes closing from pure exhaustion. No one knew how much time had passed when Matteo suddenly woke up. To his surprise, he was still alive, and so were Dave and Linda beside him. While they sat there in confusion, a man approached from nearby. He introduced himself as a receiver, someone sent to welcome survivors who reached the island. He explained that once they set foot on the island, they were safe to sleep. A barrier here protected them, and Nightmare's powers couldn't penetrate it. Led by Vadim, they arrived at the living quarters where many survivors from around the world had already gathered. Dave wanted to ask about the Nightmare, whether those who died could be brought back, but Vadim didn't know much himself. He only told Dave that Safet was waiting for him. They passed through a narrow alley and arrived at the church. Inside, he finally saw the same Safet from his dream. From Safet, Dave learned the truth about the Nightmare's plan. It turned out that Nightmare had long intended to invade the human world through nightmares, but its plan had always failed because Earth was guarded by a protective spirit. That guardian spirit was the whale Dave had seen in his dreams. But somehow the Guardian had been wounded, and with its power weakened, Earth's protective barrier had collapsed. The Nightmare seized that opportunity and began the invasion. Now, their mission was to help the Guardian recover its strength. The stronger someone's mental energy, the more they could aid the Guardian. Dave was one of those special individuals. Safety told him to rest for a few days. Once he recovered, they could begin the next phase. But what they didn't know was that elsewhere, beyond the island, those who had died in their sleep were suddenly coming back to life. But in their eyes was a strange, triangular symbol. They were no longer the people they used to be. The controlled humans began marching toward the island. Clearly, the battle between the Nightmare and Dave was only just beginning, but the story ended there.